Hi everybody, welcome to Talking Automotive with Mark and John. My name is James Sinclair and my co-host Mark Palavestra.
Hi John, today we've got James Voortman from the AADA. James heads up the AADA and represents the franchise dealer network across Australia, lobbying the various government agencies and also working with the dealer councils.
Yeah, James covers some really key topics such as the agency model. He spends a lot of effort getting the dealer voice heard in Parliament. So it's a really great topic.
James covers some great information. If you like what you see today, please click the link below to subscribe to our channel, press the like button and like us on LinkedIn.
Let's jump into it.
With 30 years' experience in auto logistics and state-of-the-art locations in 5 major Australian cities, Precar Fleet Services is an independent division of Precar Services, offering specialty fleet fit-outs for commercial applications ranging from simple tray and tow bar fitments to fully bespoke service body and accessory installation. With quality-assured safety, compliance and standardisation of vehicle builds, Precar Fleet Services are a premier all-in-one solutions provider for commercial vehicle fleet operators, leasing companies and original equipment manufacturers. For further information on how Precar Fleet Services can assist in solving your commercial vehicle fit-out needs, please visit precar.com.au and click on the link to Fleet Services.
Okay, James, thanks very much for agreeing to join us on the show. It's great to have you with a person of your knowledge and expertise. So maybe just to start us off, can you tell us a bit about who James Voortman is and a bit of your story and what you do?
Thanks, John. And look, I just wanted to thank you and Mark for this opportunity to talk to you today. A bit about James Voortman. Well, as you could probably tell from my accent, I'm a South African native. Don't hold it against me. I lived there until about 2009 when I decided to move to Australia. And coming from a background of public policy, I decided that Canberra would be the best location from a career perspective. Not everyone's first choice, but it was mine. And, you know, when I got here, I sort of got into the business of working for industry associations or lobbying for industry. And my first job in the automotive sector was with the Australian Automobile Association, which represents the state and territory motoring clubs, so essentially motorists. And sort of that's where I developed most of my initial knowledge, and I was able to then use that to work as an advisor for a federal minister, whom I also advised on numerous automotive issues. And after doing that for a few years, I was lucky enough to be employed by the AADA, and 3.5 years later, I'm still here and loving it, really enjoying working for a really interesting industry and wouldn't want to be anywhere else.
Now, James, a question for me is, what is the AADA? You seem to like a lot of the AAA organisations. So AADA, what's the AADA, and where did it come from?
Look, that's a great question. And, you know, the people here in Canberra and my predecessor, David Blackwell, used to talk about the alphabet soup of automotive associations. You got the MTAA, the AADA, the FCAI, the AAA, all of these organisations, and they all are sort of unique in their own way. But the AADA is the peak industry association which exclusively represents franchise new car dealers. They are our only members. Our board is exclusively made up of franchise new car dealers, and we advocate and lobby on behalf of that industry, primarily to the federal government on a range of issues as identified by our members and our board. In its current form, it's a fairly new organisation, and it's a little over 7 years old. And it was previously, you would see dealers were all members or part of state and territory-based motor traders associations, and most of them still are members of those associations. But about 7 years ago, a number of senior figures within the industry decided that they needed an organisation which exclusively represented the needs of dealers at a national level, and that's how the AADA was born. And I think it's fair to say it's come a long way in those 7 years.
James, can you tell us a little bit about who can become a member of the AADA? And how do they go about joining your organisation?
Yeah, look, so as I mentioned in the previous answer, membership of the AADA is only available to those owners of franchised new car dealerships. And how we have managed to attract members is through the dealer councils of every brand in Australia. So I think it's fair to say that almost every major volume player has a dealer council, and all of those councils have made the decision to join the AADA and contribute towards its operations via a levy of $2.50, which is applied on the sale of each new car. So I think it's fair to say that we've probably got over 95% of all franchised new car dealerships as our members in Australia. While there are a handful of low volume brands which are not yet members, I'm talking about the likes of Great Wall, Haval, MG, those brands that don't have dealer councils. We are still, sort of adamant that we'll continue to work with those brands to try and bring them on board. But I think if you look at the multi-franchise nature of the industry, I think it's fair to say that all dealers are represented by the AADA and are essentially members.
And so with the AADA, what services do you provide to those franchise dealers? Because the dealer councils are a very important part of the ecosystem, protecting the interests of both the dealer network and even the brand. There's a lot of work that's done in collaboration with dealer councils and dealers, and OEMs. How does the AADA provide support to the dealers?
Our main service that we provide to franchise new car dealers, our number one service is the lobbying and advocacy that we undertake here in Canberra, primarily in Canberra at a national level. I think it's fair to say that we've been involved in some incredibly important policy issues over the years. I'll use a topical one as an example. Our biggest issue at the moment is trying to get a better balance in the automotive franchising regime. We want better protections for dealers in Australia. And we've achieved some success, over the course of the last 12 months. We've seen the government introduce better end of term protections for dealers. We now see that there is the ability to collectively bargain without needing an authorization from the ACCC. And we are soon to see unfair contract term protections extended to many more businesses, not all dealers, but many more. So there have been some really good sort of protections put in place, and I would say that the AADA's advocacy and lobbying has been a big part of that. Nevertheless, as we saw with General Motors, there's still a long way to go, and we will always be there fighting on behalf of dealers to get those better protections, because we think it will benefit them in the long run. However, there are numerous other policy issues we sort of represent dealers on. If you think about the year we've just had, 2021, with the COVID-19 pandemic, we played a leading role in those discussions with government around assistance measures such as the JobKeeper package, such as the instant asset write-off. We also have, sort of lobbied pretty hard to government on things like the lending laws. We've seen over the past 3 years, I would argue, one of the main reasons we've seen the volumes of new cars sold come down is because that the application of lending laws has become very stringent. And we've worked with government on sort of making them aware of that fact. And I'm glad to say that there's legislation before the Parliament now to sort of rein that in and sort of create more of a balanced approach. Another success we had was going back 3 or 4 years ago. We convinced the government to abandon its plans to allow for the parallel importation of new cars. That scheme, we think, would have led to significant consumer and industry harm. And fortunately, we were able to sort of talk them out of that. And then, we'd also argue that we've moderated much of the new regulation which has been applied to finance and insurance over the years. Although we haven't convinced the government to abandon some of these regulations which have come into play for finance and insurance, I would argue that without us having a seat at the table, the situation could have been a lot worse than what it was. So that advocacy and lobbying strand to the services we provide is the most important. And that is because the AADA board and the Australian Motor Dealer Council, which is made up of all the dealer councils in Australia, has sort of specifically identified that as the number one priority for the AADA. But aside from the policy and advocacy that we pursue, we also sort of believe it is our job to create awareness for our members on some of the regulatory changes which are affecting them. But we also try and facilitate debate on some of the trends which are emerging in this industry during what is a very important sort of time for change in our industry. And I'll give you a few examples there. A hot topic in the industry at the moment is the agency model. We've seen a number of brands say that they would like to go that way. We've seen it sort of become a new model in markets like New Zealand and in South Africa. And obviously, many of the dealers in Australia have a lot of questions, and the AADA has tried to do some work to help educate our members on what that means. We also like to sort of provide opportunities for our members to learn through our annual convention and our study tours that we provide for them. A lot of those are the services we provide. We encourage our members to call them whenever they have a problem that we think that they can help with, and we really are an organisation that is here for the members, and we like to have our priorities set for us by the members.
James, can you just go into a little bit more detail about your study tours and conventions? You know, there's been such big changes in COVID. Are you still doing anything at the moment? And how do you see it going forward in the future?
Yeah, look, very good question. And where I was probably the last time I stepped on a plane was when I arrived back in Australia from our 2020 study tour way back in sort of mid-February of last year. We came back from our annual study tour that we conduct to the NADA, the North American Dealer Association's show. And that was the last time I got on a plane. And since then, the events of 2020 have meant that we could no longer hold our 2020 convention. Usually we have a convention every year around September, and we were forced to cancel our 2020 convention, which was due to be held in Sydney. Instead, we had a virtual event, which was fairly successful, and it opened some new opportunities. And we think it worked pretty well because it allowed, dealers to attend who might not always be interested in the travel element. It was probably more cost effective in many ways, but it also allowed dealers to tailor their attendance. For instance, if they were interested in a F&I session, they could allow their F&I managers to attend that one session. So it's a very flexible solution, but there's no doubt that you miss that sort of face-to-face interaction that you do have from an in-person convention. And that's why the plan at this stage is to have the 2021 convention at a physical setting, and we'll be rolling out the details of that event in the near future. These conventions are great events. We often attract speakers who, sort of provide our members with insights on what the future looks like in the industry. From an association's perspective, we often make it available as a platform for politicians to attend and address our industry. And in past years, we've had people like the chair of the ACCC, Rod Sims. We've had the Deputy Prime Minister and various senior government officials attend our convention. So we look forward to doing that in person again and really developing programs that enable our members to learn and apply those lessons in their dealerships. As for the study tour, look, for many years, the AADA has been running study tours to various locations, ranging from China to Europe. But the one flagship event that we do every year is the one I was talking about earlier, the annual NADA show in the United States, usually at the start of the calendar year. This will probably be the first event, the 2021 event, that we have not run in around, 25 years or so. These events were being run when many of the members were still part of the MTAs, and it's more than a 20-year association we've had with sending these events to the US. So this is the first time we will not be sending a tour, but the NADA, like the AADA, will be having their convention virtually, and we've been given an offer from the NADA to allow our members to attend for a much reduced rate. And many of those dealers are taking up the opportunity, and dealers are able to register through the AADA.
Now, James, I was just wanting to ask, do you think coming up you're going to have a blend of between online and physical, or do you think your local show will be just a physical convention?
No, look, I think the genie's out of the bottle. So many people have said that if COVID-19 has showed them anything, it has showed them how powerful video conferencing, Zoom primarily, is in allowing sort of meetings to take place. And I think my personal opinion is it will be a blend. We've already experimented in the past, even before COVID, with streaming some of our events on YouTube and so forth. But I think the answer is that you will have a hybrid of in-person attendance along with a virtual presence, and in that way you cover all of your bases. So I think it's going to be an interesting year, not only for the AADA convention, but for, the whole convention industry. I'm proud to say that we were one of the few that were able to sort of adapt and get our show in order and sort of get a virtual convention up and running last year. And I really have to say a big thank you to our convention partners, in particular eBusiness Media, for facilitating that. So my answer to you on that one, John, is I think it's a combination of both.
Now, James, what do you see, or what are the biggest challenges that you deal with in your day-to-day operating at the AADA?
Yeah, good question. Look, I think from an industry association perspective, the biggest challenge is having your voice heard. And I say that because here in Canberra, there are so many industries fighting for the government's attention. You name it, they have an industry association with lobbyists that are trying to make sure that they're number one on the agenda. Industries ranging from mining, big mining companies, to egg farmers, to environmental groups, to, you name it, they're here. So I think it's making sure you have your voice heard. I think we're lucky because new car dealerships, from my perspective, have such a good story to tell in terms of the fact that they are located in almost every electorate in Australia. And in those places, they provide jobs, apprenticeships. They sort of make sure local taxes are paid. They make sure that local investment is made, and not only in cities, but in country towns too. So I think there's a great story there of the impact that dealerships play across Australia. And I think the fact that we have achieved some successes, those that I mentioned earlier, is a testament to our members and how much they are valued by their communities and their political representatives. Another challenge I have, and I think I've mentioned that franchising, automotive franchising protections is our number one priority, is sort of trying to get the government to understand that this is an area that needs to happen now. We have a lot of change happening in the industry, and manufacturers, as we've seen with GM, as we're seeing with those looking at an agency model, are looking at their options, and that's fine. They're looking at their options, whether that is withdrawing from the country or rationalising your network or changing the model. It's their right to do so, but when they do so, they need to do it fairly and with maximum transparency, with adequate compensation. It's very difficult for our members to speak out because when you do stick your head out, you risk the relationship you have with those manufacturers. So I think it's really important, and it's a big challenge for us to convince our policymakers to see the importance of these changes, but it's a challenge we'll never stop pursuing.
Now, James, following on from that, we saw Holden put out this last year. Do you think this has had a major impact on the change of the landscape?
Look, so firstly, we have the immediate impact from General Motors' decision to pull the Holden brand, and that was 185 businesses who had structured their businesses for a 5-year agreement, have that agreement cut short, and then offered very little compensation. And, every dealer I spoke to from Holden, all the Holden dealers I spoke to, were united in their criticism of the compensation packages that were given to those dealers. And this came during a very difficult time, during the height of the pandemic. So that immediate sort of effect, would have caused a lot of distress, would have caused a lot of economic damage to many of those members. And frankly, we probably saw jobs lost, businesses sort of treated poorly. But I'm more worried about the ongoing effect and the fact that Holden has managed to, or General Motors has managed to demonstrate to many of the other manufacturers that this can be done in the way it was done. So the precedent that was set, and the precedent is a big offshore manufacturer basically terminating a big network of dealers and then leaving them with an inadequate compensation package and not negotiating on it one bit. We had federal ministers urging them to engage in arbitration. They flat out refused. And I'm worried about the precedent. We've already seen other manufacturers start changing dealer agreements, putting in clauses around dealers having no rights to compensation. So that is a big worry. And I think we need to send a clear message as a country that if you want to do business here in Australia, you have to treat your local partners fairly. And I think that especially applies to automotive dealers who invest a lot of money for the right to represent these manufacturers. They invest a lot of money, and they structure their businesses to achieve target. And when sort of suddenly a decision is made to close down a network, they're ones left to pick up the tab. So I am worried about the precedent it's created. The government's aware of it, and change is afoot. We've already seen some changes. The question we have now there is the change that's been made enough? We argue we need to go further as an industry.
Now, James, when you speak with the government, how do you actually engage with them to protect the interests of the dealers and the dealer councils? What's your secret game plan? What's the secret sauce or the game plan to go out and get the best result?
Yeah, look, great question. And it is a major challenge. As I mentioned earlier, there are so many voices, including the voices in our industry, which might not have the same view as ours, and in particular the groups representing manufacturers. But I think the secret to engaging with the governments, to sort of getting them to see our way, or to getting them to sort of understand the importance of what we're asking for, is to make sure that they understand why our industry is important. And once again, the story we have to tell there is one where, dealerships are set up in local communities. And I'll use an example. In a town like Dubbo, dealerships are major employers. They're one of the few businesses taking on apprenticeships. When there's a showroom refurb or a new dealership built, they use the local tradesmen. So a lot of that investment flows back into the community. We know that they're often the ones sponsoring local football teams or the local charities providing them with a car. So these are important businesses. And I think once you've told that story and made the case for why they're important, it's much easier to convince your government, your elected members of parliament to sit down and think about the merits of any policy changes and whether they're going to help or hinder our specific industry.
James, can you tell us a little bit about how you communicate with your members or other interested parties who would like to hear about some of the things you do?
Yeah, sure. Look, I mean, we send out a number of internal communications from the AADA. We have a monthly newsletter. We have a weekly wrap-up of some of the news that's occurred in the automotive industry. We have bulletins that go to our dealers. And then we also, when we need to put out media releases and so forth and communicate via the media. Anyone can go onto our website and sign up to some of those newsletters. And I encourage anyone interested in the industry to do so. So that's the main way we communicate sort of electronically. We also communicate to our members via the dealer councils, and we're lucky that we've structured an organisation called the Australian Motoring Dealer Council, which is made up of all of the chairs of the various dealer councils, and we're able to meet with them and communicate to them, who then can in turn communicate to various dealers if we have issues to talk to them about. In terms of any other communication, myself, my colleague, our CEO, Brian Savage, and others in the association have an open door policy. If you want to contact us and talk to us, we're generally sort of available. If you're a person who's involved in the industry, we sort of do like to engage with as many people as we can. So those are some of the ways we communicate, and we're always looking at sort of other ways to do that. And I guess doing this podcast is one of those examples.
Well, it's great to have you on the show, James. Now, John and I just put together a podcast which put our peg in the sand, and we gave our perspective as to where 2021 how it looks the business for the automotive industry and everyone within the ecosystem, whether they're dealers, fleet customers, retail buyers, financiers, etc. What is your view and the AADA on where the industry will go this year?
Well, look, we have great hopes that the industry will build on some of the growth we saw in the last 2 months of this year. And I think there are good signs around the state of the Australian economy, the fact that a lot of that discretionary spending that cannot be used on things like overseas travel can be redirected towards our industry. So we have a lot of hope that, as well as some of the stimulus money that's running around the economy, will benefit our industry. So very hopeful. There are a few questions around supply, but I'm hoping that I'm hoping that the manufacturers and the dealers can work together to sort out some of those supply issues, and we can have a much better 2021. And I think, after 3 calendar years of negative car sales, I am very hopeful we're going to have a strong year. I know that our members are up for the challenge. I just hope that it eventuates. If you've learned anything in 2020, it's that you don't sort of predict too far in advance, but we're optimistic that it's going to be a good year and that we'll see a return to growth.
Well, I share your optimism, and as does John, because we share the view that the money that's swimming around and the inability to spend it anywhere else means the auto industry is a great place to put your money and have a nice lifestyle as a result of it, with a nice, reliable new car with low emissions and lots of safety features and great technology.
Yeah, definitely. I think we're hoping for a positive year, and I think it can be exciting as long as things move forward on COVID. James, thanks very much. Is there anything else you want to add before we move to a summary?
No, look, just thanks again for the opportunity, and encourage any listeners out there, if there's anything you want to reach out to the AADA to, please do so, and we'll always do our best to help you.
Mark, do you want to do the summary?
Okay, James, if I may summarise today and correct me if I've missed anything. So, a South African native, you were drawn to come to Australia, and you made the very wise decision to move to Canberra, which is a very unique decision. But if you are good at what you do, particularly in working with government and policy perspective, that's the right place to be. So in 2009, you moved to Canberra. You worked for the AAA, the car clubs, as a lobbying industry, but also you advised a federal minister. And that really sets a great grounding for the work that you now do for the AADA. And the AADA genus is from the Automotive Motor Traders Association. So you represent franchise dealers, so new car franchise dealers. And you're the voice at the table for the franchise dealers in collaboration with the dealer councils. Now, when you look at the list of achievements, there's some pretty significant ones here that when we see that a lot of turmoil with COVID, with the departure of General Motors and the impact to the dealers and their investment, your biggest challenge is getting a voice at the table, getting a voice at the table where it really matters at a policy level, the higher level. So getting your voice heard against all these other industries like the mining industry, the fishing industry, and all those other industries that get a lot of share of attention. You fly the flag for the new car dealers and achieve some pretty good results. Now, we saw the APRA impacts with the financial impact on the automotive industry with the inability to get finance. So the AADA and yourself were instrumental in moderating those rules. So now we've got an easing of those rules that are happening this year. But also the instant asset write-off and the extension of that to keep that stimulus going so that businesses can refresh their vehicles and we can get some stock turned through the industry and get new and used car supply. And also JobKeeper for dealers, because you raised a really good point that many of us that operate in OEMs at national levels forget that the dealers are in every electorate in this country. So it is in every elected official's interest to make sure that they have a strong new car franchise dealer network across all of the electorates in Australia, because these people are grassroots and engage with the community. They draw on local services. They look after the community from a sponsorships perspective. So these businesses are critical to the lifeblood of many of these rural and metropolitan areas. Some pretty amazing achievements that you've done, but there's still more work to be done. There's the agency model and understanding what happens around that, and also making sure that, for example, the policy of parallel imports, that their true awareness of what that would have meant to these franchise dealers was a very good outcome where that was parked for the time being. Beauty is that you share our optimism that the future is a bright one for the auto industry and for the new car dealers. and the collaboration that you speak of between the dealers and your association, the dealer councils, the government, and the manufacturers. It's so critical that all three parties speak and work together so that we have a sensible outcome with an industry with sensible regulations that protect the interests of all stakeholders. And you're doing a great job to fly the flag for the franchise dealer network. Have I missed anything?
Great summary. No, 100%.
That's impressive, because the bit that you highlighted for me is I grew up in a country town, so I actually started in this industry in a rural dealer, which was a very big dealer for that community, and the tentacles spread far and wide. And then later in life, when I worked for an OEM visiting various rural dealers, you can see just how important that dealer is. And ironically, it was actually for Holden. So, the Holden dealers in every town were just such a part, and everybody knew the Holden dealer. They were just the people in the town, and you'd go out that evening and you'd meet the local community, and they'd come to coffee shops and meet with the dealers, etc. So it's a significant part of Australian culture and the Australian community.
Yeah, and look, as you know, that the jobs in those regional areas are so important. It's just not given that people will find jobs in those areas, and often they have to move to sort of metropolitan areas or maybe bigger regional centres within the country to get a job. So it really is valued. You'd probably make the argument that regional communities value their dealerships more than the metro ones. I'm not saying metro communities don't value their dealerships, but they really are sort of held in high regard in those regions. And they'll sponsor the footy team. They'll sponsor the Country Women's Association, and I think they'll often sort of go the extra mile for their customers because the dynamic of those regional communities are so different. Close-knit communities look after each other, and I think the dealers no different there.
Okay, James, thanks very much. It's been great talking to you, and I think some fascinating topics. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Ky.
Thanks for listening today. Hopefully you got as much out of the discussion with James as we did. James covered off some fantastic information on what the AADA do and the challenges that he has dealt with, and also some of the activities that are coming forward with agency and some of the other initiatives. If you liked what you saw, please click us down low as far as subscribing to our YouTube channel. Press like to make sure we share as much as you can with your group. And please like us on LinkedIn. If you have any questions at all on this subject or any other subjects that we have podcasts on, please reach out to either John Sinclair or myself, Mark Pallavestra, on LinkedIn, or leave a comment on our YouTube channel. Thanks for listening, and please listen again.
Thanks everybody for listening. We'll talk to you again next week.